I had just gotten off the phone with my wife of 11 years. I felt awful. The conversation had left her in tears. It was now the day after tomorrow and the weight of things was weighing me down. I had almost lost my job 3 years ago because Grace had been so devastated that I had missed my wedding anniversary that she had asked me to come home. She had approached our architectural firm about placing an ad in an upscale magazine, which was beyond our budget at the time, and her dark hair caught my eye. With the help of my partner, I managed to keep her long enough to secure a date. At that moment I knew I was in love. We dated for 6 months and then she moved in with me for 6 months until she could transition from the curb to the office. "Neil, I know you're on the phone," I urged into the receiver and I heard him answer. "Travis, I'm busy as hell right now, you know. I'll make this short and sweet, and then I'm leaving right now and I won't be back until Monday." He asked me where I was going and I told him I was going to spend my anniversary with my wife and I would see you on Monday. I replied, "Have a nice day, you asshole, and remember to knock before you barge in." I retorted, "You hear that a lot, don't you?" He teased, "People who know you don't say that." "Hey, sorry, things have been tense at home lately since they brought that new guy into Grace's department." Without hanging up I dialed Buddy, Neil's secretary. She was very good at taking care of things. I was in desperate need of a plane ticket. After speaking with her I sprinted to my car and headed home to pack my bags. As I was packing my suitcase my cell phone rang. "You have 45 minutes to get to the airport for security. Your ticket is waiting at the desk under your name." Unfortunately, the hotel where Grace is staying has no more rooms available, so I've booked one 2 blocks away. "Have a safe trip and I'll see you on Monday." Batty told me before abruptly hanging up. Immediately after checking in, going through security, and boarding the plane, I put in my earbuds and turn on my iPod. I don't particularly enjoy flying, but music soothes my nerves and keeps my hands from gripping the armrests too tightly. But over the past few months, things have become strained between Grace and I. Our once vibrant sex life, which was active just 3 months ago, has become lifeless, and she hasn't let me get close to her in over 2 months. For the first 2 weeks she came home thinking about how she was going to oust Mr. Marcus Brooks. She even joked about taking extreme measures, but by the 3rd week her agitation had eased, and a few weeks later she mentioned that they were starting to work together more effectively, and were eventually assigned to take care of an important client together. But Grace always put me at ease, and aside from our lack of intimacy, she paid even more attention to me than before. After removing my bags from the overhead compartment, my mind raced with ideas on how to surprise Grace at the restaurant without revealing my presence. I got out of the car at the curb and after quickly checking in, I took a hot shower and hurried out of the hotel, eager to intercept Grace before she went out to dinner. I took a leisurely stroll, noting that the romance club recommended by the cab driver was conveniently located just a few doors down from Grace's hotel. I wanted to ask if my wife Grace was in her room, and if so I hope to have a word with her. "Please, Martin's Grace." "Yes, she's staying with us. Just a moment please, I'll see if she's available. I'd like to surprise her. Tomorrow is our wedding anniversary, and I'd appreciate it if you wouldn't mind a word between us. I think I'll go to the restaurant now, maybe I'll get lucky. Good night." As I was saying goodbye, I followed the aroma wafting from the far side of the lobby to a bustling room filled with people dining and chatting. The place was full of customers and I didn't think I had much of a chance of finding Grace. My view was blocked by the high booth and I could only catch glimpses of the faces and heads of the patrons, and deciding not to go near any of the tables until I was sure who was sitting there, I retraced my steps through the dining room, focusing my gaze once again on the walls of the booth. Grace was sitting there, laughing and enjoying her meal with a man I didn't recognize. She looked stunning in the outfit she always chose in anticipation of her vertical and horizontal dance nights. I gripped the doorframe tightly, and when he leaned in to kiss me, I jerked back as Grace eagerly met his lips and stumbled away from the door. I stumbled to the center of the hall and dropped into an oversized wingback chair, my trembling hands reaching for my face. I don't know how long I sat there, my eyes glued to the dining room, the familiar cackle of laughter catching my attention as I watched as Grace walk arm in arm with the man. They leaned in close, their laughter intertwined. As she whispered in his ear, and they talked within 15 feet of me, but all I could do was stare at the way Grace was looking at him. I leapt from my chair and headed for the exit with a determined stride, and despite my unassuming stature, the crowd seemed to part effortlessly as I made my way through it, my expression no doubt reflecting the turmoil within me. My body twisted instinctively, my eyes locked on them as they walked through the doors together in the direction of the hotel where I was staying. I snapped out of my trance and headed for the door, but I slowed my pace to give them time to pull away, and I took a few deep breaths to try and calm the storm of emotions raging inside me. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, pausing for a moment to allow my eyes to adjust to the dim lighting. I surveyed the room and noticed them on the far side of the booth. I circled along the perimeter and made my way to a small table where I was quickly greeted by the waitress, who hovered over me as I took my seat. I heard him say to Grace, "I'm so glad you didn't guilt him into going home." Grace exclaimed, followed by the sound of kissing, "It would have been longer if you had taken me up on my offer, and at the end of the first week I was there," he said. "I have to make you think I'm a bit hard to get along with, and that I should be married, and, you know, I couldn't believe it when you came up to me and asked me out in front of Viola, and you knew I was married." Grace suggested that when the waitress brought their drinks and left, we needed to have something nice for her to thank her for keeping us together, and Grace said, "Here's to a wonderful 2 months together, and many more good times ahead." He raised his glass in a toast, and Grace did the same. I glanced at the waitress. The damn thing was getting tight after 11 years, but at least I didn't have to cut off my finger, I told her, picking up my glass and taking a drink. I slammed it down on the table. After 10 years of not having a drink, I could feel the burn of the wine as it traveled down my throat. "Dan, that's a great drink." "Thank you, ma'am," I muttered, and then turned and headed for the booth. As I approached, they had just broken a kiss. Grace turned to look at me. The moment was worth capturing. The expression on her face could have fit on a million posters, her mouth moving but no words coming out. "I remember my milestone, but it lost its charm after 11 years, I said, staring back at him when he looked at her. "Let's see 2 months of red and gold, no?" Marcus Grace half yells and reaches up to cradle his face in his arms. My fist hits his nose and I feel a sad crunch, but I know I have to leave before things escalate further. I told him sternly, "Thankfully this isn't happening in my house. Please leave a message telling me where you want your stuff delivered. If you're sensible, I don't believe you're going to show up on my doorstep. Before I turn to leave, I suggest you had better ice your nose. I think it's broken." I walked out of the club and headed toward my hotel with brisk steps, putting distance between Grace and me with every step, even though I knew that she most likely didn't know where I lived and probably wouldn't even come looking for me after my altercation with her. I provided her with all the necessary details and she assured me that once she had the flight information, she would call my room. Her acting was appalling and my anger grew as I recalled her tearfulness on the phone as I tried to convince her to come home. I could no longer bear to stay in my room and picked up my bags and went downstairs to the lobby. As I got to the floor, the receptionist put down the phone and gestured for me to come over to her. "Sir, if you leave now you have a chance of catching the last flight of the night." The receptionist told me, "Thank you. I hope the cab drivers here are reliable." I replied as I hurriedly signed the checkout form she pushed in front of me. I muttered and headed for the door, rushing out into the lobby to find a cab waiting at the street station. I paid the meter and the $50 vet bill, thanked him and hurried to the gate, my nerves on edge despite the fact that I still had a few minutes to spare, pacing anxiously and hoping no one would mistake my agitation for suspicion. I was lucky to have a seat to myself. Unlike before, I didn't feel the need for music this time. I had a lot to do. A thought suddenly flashed through my mind and I almost laughed. Grace's mom, Joyce, wasn't exactly a big fan of mine. She'd used her husband, Henry, as mushrooms, keeping him in the dark and feeding him nonsense, but I never let her get away with it. I remembered that she'd once told Grace said that one day I'd cheat on her because she'd caught me peeking at other women. Throughout the flight when we were together, I quickly glanced around to make sure no one saw my reaction before looking back at the picture. The person next to Grace was still me, but all I could see was her gazing into his eyes, and now she was making me question everything. From the beginning, Grace has tried to suggest to me, "Do you remember this? Or do you remember that?" But I always remember. I remember every conversation, every plan, every little secret shared in the dark. The image of Grace sitting at the table with him tore at my insides looking at their familiar eyes. Their gentle touch, that simple little kiss, was like a dagger in my heart. Even though I'd taken all of her things and I'd decided to go home and pack them up and take them to her mother's house, I knew that old thing would find a way to blame me. But as long as I knew the truth, the clank of the seatbelt was the signal that we'd arrived at the airport, and after pulling up at the gate, I waited for the swarm of passengers to disperse. The last thing I wanted was to be pushed too far and lose control, pulling my bag out of my overhead bin and joining the queue to enter the terminal. All that mattered was that I was home. Stepping into a dark house felt surreal. I just felt like I was getting used to it, and man, this was my home from now on. Putting my bag down, I headed for the kitchen. On the way, I instinctively flipped the switch on the answering machine. "Travis, please don't do anything irrational. I'm on my way home so we can talk. Please don't hang up until I get home." I don't think smashing the answering machine was crazy behavior. In fact, I think it was punishment for smashing it, because I was delivering a message I didn't want to hear in a voice I didn't want to hear. I organized her closet and grabbed a drawer full of clothes and stuffed them into a bag. There were some things in the drawer I hadn't seen in years. She always accused me of being a pack rat, but who knows, maybe she was wearing them for someone else. I paused for a moment with a bottle of water, contemplating my next move. The thought flashed through my mind of hosting a small picnic with hot dogs and marshmallows, but I quickly dismissed the idea because the hassle of dealing with local law enforcement and her would be more than worth it. When I got back, I realized that the pile of stuff in the front room couldn't be left there any longer, so I loaded everything into the car and drove towards her mom's house, along the lines of what I had done earlier. I thought Grace might need some clothes when she came. I was going to let her bring her own, but I couldn't bear to see them cluttering up the front room again. So I explained when Grace was coming. I assumed she was still out of town, and why would she need to get dressed here? And Joyce pressed further with concern in her tone. "Joyce, I'm not sure where she plans to stay, but I'm guessing that she might be staying with you until she figures it out." "Of course, I can't be sure. That's why I brought her things here," I said, observing that her expression had gone pale. "What the hell are you up to?" They were enjoying their 2-month anniversary at a nightclub near the hotel, you see, and after I'd practically pleaded with her to come home for our anniversary and she'd tearfully expressed regret that she couldn't, I'd tried to say something to them as they'd passed me in the lobby, but her tender gaze and whispers to him had dissuaded me from bothering them. It dawned on me that if I wanted to get on a plane out of there, I would have to intervene in their celebration. So I had my first drink in 10 years. And since you warned Grace that my drinking would lead to the breakup of our marriage, I gave her my wedding ring and gave him my broken nose. When she came home, I walked her in the door, thinking she'd come back again, and in the end I dumbed her down. None of this is true. How can you say that about your wife of 11 years? But I don't think so. I've seen it with my own eyes. For the last 2 months I've been living a sexless, solitary life while she's been out fooling around with that asshole from the moment he joined the company. If you want to welcome her back into my home, then you're even more confused than she is. Whatever you believe is your problem. As for me, I'm going to cut my losses. I'm going to send her over here when she's done with her lies. See for yourself who's talking. It's the truth. I threw the last box on the floor. I have to go home. I'm going straight into the C block and tell her what you've done. Once she does something to you, you'll rue the day you were born, she retorted angrily. After a couple hours of wandering aimlessly around the house, I ventured into a small corner of the garage that I had converted into a workspace. I hurriedly dusted off my clothes before walking to the door and opening it. Without a word I stepped back and let Grace in. "You must be in the garage." I tried knocking on the door, she said as she closed it, and followed her. "You didn't leave me much of a choice," she said. "Do you really think I would approve of you having a boyfriend? You see, I don't have anyone around me to distract me, someone I can go to dinner with, go to a club with, or just sit in the dark whispering and kissing, and all I get is a woman who can look me straight in the eye and lie to me. Yeah, I think I've made up my mind. I told you it wasn't a very flattering picture, didn't I?" And she asked me, "Do you really want to throw away the 11 years that we've been together?" And she asked me, "Are you really going to throw away the 11 years we've been together?" I don't remember being asked that, and I haven't given up anything, and you're asking me to believe that everything is fine, that I'm missing out on something? Do you mind if I start a relationship with someone else? Do you think I'd remember something like that? But it doesn't matter anymore, does it? Now you and what's his name can do your thing and not worry about me. Grace said. "Do you really think so?" Grace said, To you it's just cheating. You might find a way to justify it to yourself or even think it's my fault, is that right? I asked. No, I'm not blaming you, it just happened. She admitted that she slept with a guy for 3 months and not your husband of 11 years. It didn't happen by accident, it's your job, and then you try to hide it so you can keep doing it. And let me tell you something, babe, you're damn good at your job, and I fell for it, and with all the hookups, and I don't know how the two of you had time to have sex. You must have been laughing at you for making a fool out of me. The crying. Seen on the phone the other night, I was full of guilt, real tears. You were practically begging me to come home, but I'd already agreed to stay. I figured after 11 years you wouldn't really mind if I missed it this one time, she said, averting her eyes again. I'm sorry to make you feel guilty, but I've noticed that you've let go of the intimacy that the two of you had at dinner, and I saw you looking at him, Grace. I'm sorry, I haven't seen that look in a long time, and I said, but I don't love him, and she looked up at me and said, now that you can spend more time with him, maybe things will change, and maybe the two of you can find a place to live together. And think about how happy we were when we first started out together, and all I wanted to say was I love you, and she said I was so proud of myself and just laughed a little out of control, and I stopped. I don't know where that came from, but you sure as hell don't love me, and if that's the way you are with anyone you love, please God, don't let me make you angry. How can you sit there and think that after 11 years that I don't love you anymore? And she said, well, Grace, I can see that you've got a problem with it too. So here's one for you. If you knew I had slept with another woman, just once, not long term, just that one time, I ask you, how would you react? She smiled weakly and said, well, now suppose you found out that I had spent far less time with you every day for 3 months that I can think of, and that it meant nothing to me, and that all I did was go through the motions to make you think that everything was fine between us, and then go to work and meet up with my lover and spend all day with her. My time with you means a lot to me. I'm not being perfunctory, I'm enjoying my time with you, she said. When was the last time we had fun in bed, Grace? Grace, don't stand here declaring your love for me after what I've seen and heard. I may have been born in the night, but not last night. Jesus, you were talking to that old bag about him the moment he walked into the office, and then the two of you were sitting there. It seemed to me like you had found your next bridesmaid. All you needed was his best friend and you guys would be fine, I said, leaning back in the chair. You were just like me after all. Should I expect a waiter to come to the door? I reserve that right for myself. I was there when we started. I'll be the one to see that the last I is the dot and the last T is the cross. You know me, if I don't, that's just not right, I said. It sounds like you spent a lot of time watching and listening to us. Why did you wait so long to barge in? As I stood in front of the hotel, you both pushed your way out together and started to go to a club that my cab driver had recommended, and when I told him I was here for the anniversary, he said I wanted to go to a quiet and private club. I got there a little later than you two, but I came anyway. I really didn't know what else I needed. I wanted to just walk over and beat the shit out of that guy, but I got a table next to you and ordered a drink. I also listened to you for as long as I could, and when you toasted to him and wished him old age, I couldn't stand it any longer. But that drink burned my gut, and I didn't notice that you had to tell him what his name was, and when that Ash White looked up at me, how close he was to me, as if he was wondering what was wrong with me. I have to admit, I was pretty pleased when I touched his nose. But with what you two made combined, he should be able to repair any permanent damage. Breaking his nose when you don't want to see it anymore, what does that show me? She asked me with her arms crossed. I don't think I know what to show you. What I'm doing is meant for me, not you. Why would I fight for someone like you, someone who treats me with such disrespect? She thinks treating me that way is something I can tolerate or forgive. I think I've made it clear that I'm done with you. I'm not going to invest any more of I'm not going to put any more energy into this. It doesn't mean much to either of us right now, but you messed up the bed and now you're sleeping on it. And I looked her in the eye and said, that's it, you're kicking me out and keeping everything for 11 years and it seems like a bad deal. I just assumed that you and Marcus already had a place to live. I said his name was Marcus, and she said I don't care what his name is, he's not living somewhere or not. And I said, frustration was evident in my tone, of course he does. She replied, well then, problem solved. I retorted. I waited for her to say something and then it dawned on me. You don't think his wife would approve of such an arrangement? I guess I was watching for her reaction. What did you find out about him? How did you know he was married? She was surprised and asked me, oh my God, this is not a joke. Do you really think I'm that stupid? Why else would you be here? I said my patience has run out. I've thought about it. I think maybe 11 years later, she said, looking away, and I interrupted. Think again. Without us, that's your call. It's been the best 2 months, and there will be more to come. Do you remember that line? Those 11 years meant nothing to you before and they mean nothing to me now, so I'll give you all the money from those 11 years as soon as I draw up the papers. I'll give you the same offer on the house as before. You don't really want me to feel sorry for you, do you? Of course I'm not going to forget the person I spent my life with, but as far as memories go, it's going to take me a long time to get the image of you two together out of my head. I'm not going to let someone I don't trust live under the same roof as me, and I'm not going to trust you anymore. So do you want a house? I asked her. My tone was firm. No, I don't want a house. Give me a few days to find a place. I'll probably take a lot of the furniture, she said, pulling her hand out of her pocket. What do you want me to do with this? That's what you do with it anyway. You might as well get some money for it. There was a hint of bitterness in my voice. Well, you know what? I could get some money for it. Maybe I could pawn it, she said. Wow, you're not going to get much for it. They buy it by the weight. You probably won't get $30 for it. And you can't get a real solid gold toe ring for $30, but that's just me. It's yours. Do with it what you want. Do with it what you want. She asked me if I had taken all my stuff out of the closet. I turned to open the door. Well, I had taken it all out, but I was kind of pissed off at the time, and did a poor job packing. I hope you still have some of the clean, unwrinkled stuff you left behind from your travels. I tried to keep my tone casual as much as I could, and she asked if I wanted to take a look at it, and I said no. You know how I am, and watched as she looked at me with a slightly disdain. I sat there and waited. I heard her go into the bedroom, then the closet, and finally the bathroom. A few minutes later she came down and stuffed some makeup into a fancy zipper bag. With a fake smile she said, "Hey, I'd be happy to give you a hand as long as you don't get too close to me." With a straight face I said, "Kiss my ass," she said as she turned and walked out the door. "I'm not going to kiss that. I don't even know where it went," I said, closing the door. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story. If you enjoyed it, please consider bookmarking and subscribing, and if you haven't already, please feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below.